as far as takedowns go, I think, how do you think that culture affects, the learning process that we go through when we're doing takedowns?
Our motto is now train smart, stay humble. All right. So train smart. You want to preserve your body. You worry about longevity. You understand there's a wear and tear of continuous practice. And if you train too hard all the time, you're going to pay dividends later in terms of pain and slowing down and having to recover more or being impaired to practice. Okay. So the train smart has two aspects. One, how you properly train and protect yourself and your training partner. And secondly, how you are open-minded. And that's the stay humble part, that you can incorporate and enhance your jiu-jitsu by adopting the takedown game, which is so critical, whether it's for self-defense or tournaments. Nobody starts flat on the ground. And I think judo and jiu-jitsu in particular, they are unison. I don't think there shouldn't be a distinction between the two. I think there's a formality that makes them different when it comes to tournament rules, but the essence of it doesn't say so. So, but of course, when somebody comes to my gym, takedowns is not the major predominant aspect of what we teach, but we would say it's at least 25-30%, 1/3 of jiu-jitsu based upon what we do should be the takedown game. And I understand there's a culture in jiu-jitsu that sometimes neglect that. And it's fun for you to roll, just lie down the mat, pull guard, and start on your knees and just kind of go for the endorphin high. But I think you should do your diligence and have the minimum amount of knowledge how to start on your feet successfully, not just applying takedowns, but also protect your body when somebody takes you down.
Yes, sir. And I think that culture where you can trust your partners really makes a big difference too, because you are putting your safety in somebody else's hands in those moments, and so it's nice to have somebody that you can work with who's not going to be motivated by ego. So I really enjoyed that about the culture there. As far as longevity and self-preservation, what other advice can you give our viewers on that?
I think the pillars. It's ironic because I'm going to mention one that it was not part of my original. It was out of my radar, sort of saying. Time management. Ironically, you have to include that because you got to block time for business, time for training, time for recovery. Okay, so this is actually a skill in itself, because a lot of times you mentioned, and you and I talk about, you have your agenda for the day, and then you have contingencies, things that take place that are maybe expected or unexpected, or take a turn on themselves and demand more of your attention, time, and energy, and that can disrupt other things that you should keep in mind. And I understand it's unavoidable for us to be in those situations here and there, but in regards to the day-to-day, time management, for me is a big one. I start the day, the first thing I do, I take care of my body right now. That's number one. The nutrition aspect, and I'm not trying to sound here, I want to bring that as a tangent. I'm doing the carnivore diet, which has presented tremendous effects on my body, not just the weight loss and consistent maintenance of my weight now, 32 pounds less from when I started, but also the level of energy and less inflammation and all those things, less pain on my body. Supplementation. All right. I always took supplements, but you got to know what you take, not just if you need it, but also what kind. All right. There's a lot of hearsays and a lot of products that are not of optimum quality out there. So you got to be diligent on those two. And thirdly, the way you train, what you do when you're on the mat, intensity, you should pace yourself. The older you get, the more you should spend time on skill building and less time on cardio. You can do cardio anytime, but if you do skill building, you can always incorporate a bit of cardio with resistance to a level. You do dynamic drills where your opponent resists 50%. And a couple of times a week, you can do the full spar all the way, just to test yourself. This is all cool. So those things are all a triad, but it boils down to time management. And I think if I could tell anybody here, put yourself first on the list. Because if you're last on the list, no matter what you have ahead of you, you're not going to be in optimal shape, either physically, emotionally, or even spiritually, to fulfill what your potential should be. So in a nutshell, other thing I will do is incorporate hacks. Okay. I do red light therapy. I use Joov, Joov. It's a good brand, established, and it does wonders for me. I have the red light therapy and the red sauna, the infrared sauna, which is amazing. I do like 3 or 4 times a week. Before I used to do every day. And just be consistent in that regards. Put yourself first, and everything else will fall into place.
Yes, sir. I know I've heard you talk about before, taking care of yourself, and if you're seeing a chiropractor, do that on a regular basis. If you're
Sure.
Your nutrition, your health, all those things.
Yeah, that's part of the hacks.
Yeah.
I do chiropractor once or twice a week. Yeah.
Yes, sir. As far as because you've been doing jiu-jitsu for how long now? 53.
I started when I was 4, so 53 years.
53 years, yeah. So that's a long time, and that's a lot of wear and tear on the body. Anybody who's been doing jiu-jitsu for any amount of time knows that it can be rough on your body. And it's up to us to protect ourselves and
Sure.
take care of ourselves. What advice would you give for maybe somebody who's starting off a little bit later, like in their 30s or 40s, even 50s, starting off in jiu-jitsu as a beginner? What kind of tips would you give those guys, to make it so that they can stick with this for a long time?
Spend more time on the skill building and less time on the cardio. I would say, when I say skill building, you still spend energy, you still have a good workout. But because I'm a believer on resistance drilling and tactical training. For instance, resistance drilling, if you're doing an armbar from the guard and the guy starts to resist up to a threshold when you're almost on the point of fail, there's going to be energy expenditure. There's going to be a higher degree of engagement for you to get to the position than somebody who's just idle, letting you do in a static fashion. The second thing with the tactical training, depending where you are in your building of your game, you just fragment what block of your game you want to get better at. I'm working better on escape. So anything you do guard-wise or other aspects of jiu-jitsu, you do less and lead the training into that situation that you want to enhance a little bit further. And then you kind of pick other blocks of your game and start to build them up. And when you do your occasional, sparring session, shouldn't be more than 30 minutes, when you go full speed. You kind of test those and then go back to skill building again. This is like people that follow that formula, they become prodigious in jiu-jitsu or anything in that matter, because there's not going to be any hindrance of your body slowing down or your wear and tear being a factor. Your longevity is so far ahead compared to the average person. But most people, it's kind of like the get quick rich scheme. They have a bunch of energy, they got a bunch of money, and they spend it all when they get it. So you're young, testosterone high, and some of these young kids, they even add more testosterone enhancing products on top of what they already have. So they want to burn it all out in their youth, and they miss the mark at a later time, So that would be my main advice.
Awesome. We mentioned before strategy, for building a good takedown game and your grappling game. What would you have to say about that?
I use geometry as a base. All right. I usually look at people and break lines across their body, center line that divides his body in half, and flat lines that go on shoulder, midsection, hip, and knee. So if I shoot for a double leg, I know I want to be either between the hip and the knee, or between a little bit above the knee and a little bit above the hip, so I can get like a body lock. Just give an example. So just by having that geometry, and then of course the angles, are you being flat with the guy or being turned sideways, shoulder on shoulder? Are you trying to align with the shoulder? Are you trying to be in front of the guy? In the judo walk, when somebody pulls you behind you and you go, then they have the shioinage or the ponsiori or the taratoshi. All those moves are there because of the angle. So it's a game of angles. And then the other thing too, I use the fingertip rule. I don't start any takedown until both of us can stretch our arms and our fingertips touch. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people, they shoot too early, or they try to when it's too far. and grip battle. I use more elbows than hands for grip battle because in jiu-jitsu you have to preserve your fingers. So a lot of times somebody grabs me, I try to, rotate the elbows, use the elbow as much as I can. And this relates to jiu-jitsu as well. So like I said, giving that visual idea cuts to the chase, a major aspect, because a lot of times you can have the technique, but you don't have the distance control and you don't have the angle. So it's really hard to execute. So for me, that approach is, and then just to add one last aspect, because I'm jiu-jitsu minded, I always take in consideration how I'm going to end up once I start a takedown. So if I'm doing a takedown that I expose my back, and by the time I get to the ground, the guy has my back, that's not going to be the way I'm going to go about when I do takedowns. So we have that further consideration. And you're part of that insider's mind because you play the judo and the jiu-jitsu game. So there's an integration that has to take place in that regard, in my opinion.
Yes, sir. And I agree. One of the things that I focus on when I'm teaching is what we call it, the fortune is in the follow-up, and just thinking that a takedown is a method of positional advancement instead of a separate thing, right? And I think that that's what happens sometimes with people.
Sure.
See it's a separate thing, and it really they should be joined together. I'm using my takedown to get to a position of dominance and then move on from there, and advance my position. So I think that that's something that you and I've talked about that lots of times, and something that we like to share with our students as well.